That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I conducted this interview before the mid-air collision over Washington, D.C. between an American Airlines flight and an Army Black Hawk helicopter. President Trump immediately blamed the crash on DEI because that's who he is. In a moment of crisis, in a moment of national mourning, he instinctively sought to cast blame and to divide Americans instead of comforting the grieving and letting the investigators do their jobs. In an extremely unusual move, the Army chose not to release the name of one of the Black Hawk pilots alongside the other crew members, apparently at the request of that pilot's family. We now know that that pilot was Rebecca Lobach, an experienced aviator who was a distinguished military graduate from UNC Chapel Hill's ROTC program. Judging by the response online from right-wing trolls to the fact she was female, it's hard to fault her family or the Army for delaying the release of her name, especially after President Trump said DEI was the reason for the crash. I'm not going to share with you what the MAGA extremists are saying about this pilot who gave her life serving her country. The comments are despicable and degrading, but they are right in line with what Trump himself offered up from the presidential podium in the wake of the crash. I think we're all going to see what this assault on DEI is really about. It certainly isn't about creating a meritocracy. It's about creating a government-sanctioned permission structure for racism and misogyny. Today's conversation is with Marianne Schnall, an activist and author and founder of feminist.com. Before we get to it, I want to share this clip of an interview with the father of one of Rebecca Lobach's crewmates, Ryan O'Hara. Let his words sink in.
CBS News' Mark Strassman got an exclusive interview with O'Hara's father, Gary. He was asked about President Donald Trump's comments just yesterday, blaming the previous administration's DEI policies for the crash. Here's his reaction.
I know they've identified one of the pilots, but if the other pilot was a woman, to me, I can't imagine being the parents of that other pilot if she was a girl, saying that, because she's a woman, she was less capable than the man. I can't imagine the horror that those parents must be going through. I mean, I'm hoping that's not the case. I don't know who the other pilot was, but Ryan, I know Ryan respected the people that he flew with and trusted them with his life. And, you don't get to do something in the Army unless you're qualified. You have to earn your spot to be moved into the ladder, to be put into that helicopter. They don't just give it to you. You earn it.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I've got with me today Marianne Schnall, an author, journalist, and founder of the site feminist.com. And I asked her to join me today to try to understand the implications for women across America for Trump's second term. It's been barely a couple weeks, Marianne. What's your initial assessment?
Oh, my goodness. Well, has it been a couple of weeks? I guess it's only has been a week. And, to be honest, I think we're all still processing and assessing because a lot has happened, as we know. And it's of course, not just across women's rights, but across so many different issues and communities that have been impacted. But I would say it's not good. It's not going in the direction that we would like it to go. And, just a reminder, this has been a long haul, this ongoing kind of, struggle and effort towards gender equality and for women's rights. And already it was kind of, shall we say, exceedingly slow and arduous, and so I think the fact that what we're seeing is not going to be progress, but is going to be perhaps setbacks and regression is extremely concerning. And so I think those of us who work on these issues, are trying to, sort of take a beat and sort of, as I said, kind of assess the situation and figure out how are we going to continue to make progress during this time? And also, how do we, while thinking long game, also immediately, because we know even with the threats to women's reproductive health care, I mean, women are dying as a result of some of these decisions in the wake of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Women in some places don't have the right to control their own bodies. So it is definitely a concerning time. But what I keep trying to sort of remind myself is some of the biggest jumps forward in history have come from these moments of regression that wake us all up and actually get us to even better mobilize. So that's what I'm sort of focused on.
Well, that is certainly a silver lining approach. I won't say shocked by the speed at which the Trump administration has rolled out the executive orders and the policy changes. It's changed the name of the Gulf of Mexico. I'm appalled by it. But I mean, they clearly had a plan and they were ready to go on day one. And it feels like the left, the Democratic leadership especially, are kind of flailing. They're not sure how to respond to the speed with which Trump 2.0 is enacting / imposing its agenda on America.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, everybody's reeling, and obviously there's been a lot of, shall we say, kind of dysfunction in Washington for a while. And so in a moment of crisis like this, that's why it is flailing around. And that's why I think it's going to be up to all of us, honestly. I'm in the middle of, it should run probably by next week. I'm doing a piece on where do we go from here, where I've reached out to, all sorts of esteemed leaders and activists and organizations, because even I have the question of where do we go from here? And I think what it's going to take is each of us, those who have already been in sort of, these efforts to continue to work towards not just gender equality, racial equality. I mean, LGBTQ communities, we have to really think intersectionally in order to sort of really join together. But also all of us can play a part. I think we're going to have to find our own way of being a part of making change. We're certainly going to have to start to be more educated and civically involved. And we've got the midterms coming up in 2 years. So there's a lot to be done. But I also think kind of like not getting overwhelmed, finding out where each of us can sort of play a part, where we feel called and what we can do. And honestly, without kind of losing our minds while doing it, we're going to need to really kind of make sure that what exactly all this onslaught, as you said, of executive orders was meant to do exactly what it's doing is overwhelm us and all the chaos and make us feel overwhelmed and confused. And which fire do we put out first? So I think that's a strategy. And I think we have to be careful that we, on our own end, because this is going to be a long 4 years, are methodical about how we strategize and how we join together to not lie down during this time. We're going to have to really double down.
You write and speak a lot about that kind of intersectionality and the need for allies. It feels like that's never been more important because the front lines are constantly shifting. Right now, it's immigration. But the feminist movement has something to offer, has something to say about that. Tomorrow, it might be the Insurrection Act. But at every turn, we're going to need to find allies. There are going to be certainly people at the tip of the spear for each one of those efforts. But that fight can't happen in pockets.
Yeah, that's why when we talk about the silver lining, this has been something that has been, I think, missing and such an important framework, this intersectionality, which of course was coined by somebody who I've interviewed many times. I invite you to check her out, Kimberly Crenshaw, who also is one of the scholars behind critical race theory. And I think it's really important also to be educated about these things. But now is the time for us. This is ultimately about human rights and dignity, equality and justice for all people. And I think that's been missing from the frameworks of a lot of our movements. And that's why, honestly, I don't think we've made so much progress. Even you talking to me today as a man about women's rights. I mean, men need to be included in this, not only because as allies and because we all benefit from, more women, more diversity and leadership and influence in the world, but also because men and boys too do suffer from limiting and destructive gender roles, or this kind of notion of, which I think we're seeing. I mean, there's a lot of racism and misogyny even in the last election, but, the way that we're seeing kind of like just this, the way that masculinity plays out. I mean, right now, it seems like was it a qualification to be in the cabinet to have, somehow participated in sexual assault? I mean, this is not role models we want for our men and boys. So I really think now's the time. I've been doing this a long time, decades, but I'm hoping that this will open up a national dialogue where we can really look very starkly and soberly at so many of the problems that are impacting our culture and our world to uproot them and actually finally address them.
If you had one or two pieces of advice for men with a platform, with a voice on how to uplift and find allies or be allies, what would it be?
Oh, well, there's so many. And by the way, every time I've done like an article or a book, or an event, make sure to include a male perspective, because again, we all benefit. Sometimes it's been sort of framed as these are women's issues. I hate to quote Hillary Clinton, but this is a matter of human rights. By the way, not that I hate to quote, I love to quote Hillary Clinton, but I guess what I'm saying is that is still always true. Men have a lot to gain out of this. So not to say it has to be something you have a self-interest in, but we will all benefit. I think we can all agree that the world will benefit from having more, diversity and certainly more women and different solutions and different skill sets that we can bring to leadership, to the many problems that we face in the country. So I would just say, use your voice, start to just be aware of how you can support women, even if it's in a little way. Speak out against a sexist comment. Support a woman that you believe in running for office. How you parent your boys. How you teach them to respect and elevate women. So I think there's so many ways, and I think just finding your own path and just being more aware of it. And again, I do think we've seen the ways that men too are suffering from feeling in this kind of like man box of constrictive ways to be a man. And I think just now is a time for us to really, widen that conversation, because, I think men want to be part of this and are often feel excluded, but actually, I just wrote a whole piece, in tribute to Jimmy Carter, who was somebody who I interviewed, he wrote a whole book. It was one of the issues he was most passionate about was speaking out against the discrimination and abuse of women and girls worldwide. So if you need a role model, look at our former president.
It's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break to say thank you to everyone who supports this show via Patreon. We're adding exclusive content every week there. So if you haven't signed up yet, head over to patreon.com/Ken Harbaugh. Every single cent we get through Patreon goes back into this show, whether it's researching topics like the piece we recently did on the U.S. Army's counter-fascism training during World War II, or my reporting trips to Ukraine to show what that country is doing to defend its democracy. These episodes can't happen without your support. I'm deeply honored that so many of you have pitched in. If you've been waiting, now would be a great time. We've got another reporting trip to Ukraine coming up and other ambitious projects in the works. We're all in this together. Thanks for everything. I could not agree more about Jimmy Carter. I think he is the embodiment of what the American male should be. And that's not just because we're fellow Navy vets, but I'm thinking about his lifelong commitment to Habitat for Humanity, to uplifting oppressed and marginalized communities. That should be the role model. And instead we have Joe Rogan and Trump and his brutishness. And the end result of that isn't just harm to men. It's harm to our political system. I mean, men from the age of 18 to 54, that demo broke for Trump by 18 points. It hurts all of us when we project this incredibly toxic version of masculinity onto men.
Absolutely. So that sort of is my hope, is that this could be a time to just look at how we can establish different paradigms of how to be a person in the world and of leadership and power. And, I have this partnership with Gloria Steinem. I'd asked her to think of a phrase that could fit on a bracelet that, supports my organization, feminist.com. And she came up with, "We are linked, not ranked." And to me, that has always been so incredibly powerful because, especially when we're seeing, because right now it's very much this kind of hierarchical sense of power over like brute force, which it doesn't work. It doesn't work with each other. It doesn't work with our environment. We're all interconnected. And I think the more that we kind of see live and embody those principles, we'll all be better off because, whatever we're doing is not working. I mean, you can just tell by the mass, suffering of people and the confusion and chaos in the world and wars and the threat with climate change into our planet. So, I may be a little bit naive, but I kind of feel like people are starting to wake up and hopefully are going to feel that they can find their way of creating change. And that doesn't have to be necessarily, starting your own organization or running for office. Literally, it could just be getting more involved in your community, using your voice, calling your representative. Maybe you're just donate $20 to an organization that you believe in. Just try to do something towards creating the more equitable, sustainable, just world that we all want. And, the more of us that do that, we can really make a difference.
For a while, it felt like corporate America was on board with that project, at least some of the bigger names. I'm worried that it was all performative, given what has happened in the last couple weeks with the abandonment of DEI programs and efforts to highlight minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses. What's your take? Is that just an unfair sampling, or has the corporate approach to trying to achieve a little more balance, was that all just window dressing?
Well, I can't speak for all the companies doing it, and I certainly know of some and even have worked with some that are really passionately, genuinely committed to those principles, which are extremely important. I mean, diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's tons of research that shows that we all benefit from more diversity in our organizations, all of our institutions. So I think making a proactive effort to make that possible, I wish it weren't needed, but it is. Otherwise, we're just going to get more of the same, which has been kind of this very, white male at the top. I mean, by the way, let me just say, we were still, even with those programs, the numbers are so unequitable still, for women and across race. So we'll see who kind of stands up for still believing in those principles and those values. I hope people won't sort of, some companies won't just kowtow to where the political climate is or do it out of some, financial interest. We'll get to see who is really committed to these programs and principles and who's not. But to me, if it's not going to be in those very, specific types of programs, we're going to have to find other ways to make sure that is still a priority. Otherwise, we all suffer.
Indeed. Well, the critique from the right of DEI, I mean, it danced around the racism and misogyny, but it feels like it is full blown now, out in the open. The only photo of a corporate board that doesn't get criticized as a DEI board or an airline crew or a military unit is one that's all white males. I don't know how much more transparently racist you could get, and it needs to be called out.
It does. And that's where we're all going to have to do that because, as I said, you're right. It's all out in the open for us all to see. It was out in the open even in the election. It's out in the open right now, even in some of these, the people that, the people like Pete Hegseth who are like, talk about unqualified, who also has some really concerning parts of his past with sexual assault. And somehow he, gets elevated to this position where that he's not qualified. So it's, you can already see it playing out in real time in our government. And there's just so many immensely qualified people with so many skill sets to offer that we need across all of our organizations, companies, and institutions that never get a crack at it. And, as I said, said, we all suffer when we don't have that kind of diversity. So I do think, listen, to me, this is a form of backlash against the progress that we had made. And there was a lot of fear around that. This was never about kind of like, totally Xing out white, straight men from anything. It was just having a little bit more balance. It wasn't to seem as a threat. This was something that it's just, as I said, I think back to, just as an example, because, when I was thinking about doing interviews for my book about why we need more women in leadership, let's say it was about sexual assault in the military. And I still remember that famous, picture of all white men, talking about this topic. You need to have if you want to have a democracy, you need to have your constituents represented. As you're talking about topics, no matter what they are, that only they can speak to because of their specific set of experience and their backgrounds. It just makes logical sense. So I really do hope that just maybe with some education. I mean, this is the other thing, is I'm hoping we'll come out of our silos, because sometimes it is a matter of just trying to understand why someone feels the way they do and trying to maybe help educate or just learn from each other so that we're not going to have these harsh divides. Because my hope is that with just maybe a little bit of proactiveness and conversation and dialogue and education may not move everybody over to sort of seeing it in a different way. But I do think there's opportunity there that we shouldn't ignore.
Could not agree more, Marianne. Thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people find you?
Well, my website's marianneschnall.com. And also, as you said, I have my website, feminist.com, which is going to go through a whole relaunch for our 30-year anniversary this year. There's a lot to do. And I also have whatwillitTake.com. And lastly, my podcast is Shift Makers, where you can find some of my conversations on topics like these.
Great. We'll put links in the show notes. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for what you do.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.